Fraud can be right in front of you. It could be from your best friend. It could be from a relative. It could be from anybody. So you need to be conscious of that.
Good day. My name is David Fusco. And in this show, I'm going to talk about business, finance, and how to survive and thrive in this crazy environment that we're living in today. Welcome to my show.
Hi, class. Here is your guest speaker, David Fusco, and I will let him introduce himself and we'll go from there.
How are you? Good day, everyone. And hopefully you're having a wonderful day. And if not, it'll get better tomorrow. So, my name is David Fusco or Fusco. Fusco if you're very Italian, but, I'm an American. So I say Fusco, but it don't matter. And a short history of me to give you an idea, a little bit of an idea of my background. Born in Staten Island. Parents are Italian citizens, Italian heritage. And I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, long before you were even a dream or a dream of a dream. I grew up in a working family and a lot of construction work, and learned how to use materials and stuff. So I got a hands-on experience and a work ethic right from the get-go. At 17, I joined the Army, tricked my parents into signing the papers. They didn't even know they did that. It says, hey, I'm leaving for the Army. And I did that because, believe it or not, it was actually an easier life for me. I got lucky and I was accepted into Special Forces. So I was Green Beret and I was in the 10th Special Forces group. I was a light weapons leader and a communications sergeant. Got out of the Army, went to Pace University at night, and I worked during the day for the first 4 years while I was also in school. I was a COBOL programmer and I wrote accounting software, as it turned out, and got out of Pace University and with a Bachelor of Administration in Information Systems. And I got involved working in the accounting world. I chose accounting, first off, because no matter what you do in life, everything comes down to numbers. And whether you're a pizza parlor, a repair shop, a doctor, it doesn't matter. If you understand numbers, you're going to be way better off than many people. Just as an idea, a lot of physicians are good earners, but they are bad business people because they don't know how to run their numbers. And actually, of my clients, they seem to get taken advantage of a little bit, especially by their staff when they start relying more and more on them. So I guess the topic of today is about fraud and fraud in general and how it might happen. I received a slew of questions and I should be able to get through most of them, if not all of them. One of them was like 3 pages by itself, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle that one. But I'll do the best I can, and hopefully that within the text of the things I talk about, you will have understanding a little bit more. Fraud, well, obviously it takes 2 or more people to have a fraud. You have somebody who is defrauded or a group and a person who takes advantage of their position. That's usually what it comes down to. We're all kind of like have seen we'll call it regular fraud that happens to the general public. You get the spam emails, hey, click this, sign that. You get the, one of my sisters recently got a phone call, say, oh, we're going to turn your electric off if you don't pay your bill. And so they started asking certain questions like, what's your bank account number? What's your social security number? It's like, and unfortunately, she told them a lot of information. And I says, okay, go in, lock your accounts, change things around. So that's not the kind of fraud we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about things that we should be able to control and how to recognize different aspects of fraud. Actually, one of them that came to my mind was when I was just starting. Well, I was still doing the computer work in COBOL, and my older brother, 10 years older than I, in the 1980s, had a computer business. And part of his business was he sold hardware and peripherals for computers. He also had a large data center and it had raised flooring where they would run all the cabling underneath the flooring. And he was doing very well. And it was just a visual observation. And sometimes that's all it takes is a visual observation of things that just don't make sense. You get that funny spidey feeling, for lack of other words. And I said to my brother, I said, hey, Frank, it doesn't make sense. You've got, you know, I see a lot of purchases going through your accounts, but you don't have sales of the proper level, and you don't have the inventory sitting anywhere. So it didn't make any sense to me. And he shrugged it off for a while, and then as his cash flow started getting tighter and his purchases were increasing, yet the sales were not moving, he decided to take a look. And one of the things we did was we opened up the raised flooring, and underneath the raised flooring was a whole bunch of materials that had been purchased. Mind you, the main perpetrator was a cousin. Sometimes families are the most interesting because they sometimes feel they have an entitlement to things. So what it actually ended up happening was he had a sales force and they were selling. Some of them found out cousin was stealing by letting my brother make the purchases, and then he created his own company and he was then selling those items. So he had a 100% profit because he had zero costs involved in that. Not just that, he was getting paid by the hour to work for my brother. What a nice deal. Well, actually, a couple of the other salespeople caught on to that, and instead of turning him in, they joined in. It's a little collusion going on there. So it didn't take long, and unfortunately for my brother, because of that, it went on too long, and he ended up going bankrupt. And and he was making probably a net of 500,000 a year, and we're talking 1980s money, not 2025 money. Probably have to be 2 million now, you give or take. So fraud can be right in front of you. It could be from your best friend. It could be from a relative. It could be from anybody. So you need to be conscious of that. Jordan Schmidt asked, have I ever come across any kind of fraud in my business, in my own business? And if I did, how would I handle it, etc.? I hadn't, thank God, come across any fraud in my own business. I have 10 employees, but I'm very hands-on. So I know my numbers, I live my numbers, and I control them. I sign every check. But I did witness from another accounting firm, oh God, it was quite a while ago. And in that firm, they had a junior accountant who'd just been hired. And part of his job was to go to clients' offices. And this was back when we used pencils and pens and paper checks, and there was no electronics going on. We're going back into the 1980s in the Stone Age, a little after the rock and chisel. And what happened was this junior accountant was in charge of filing and paying the payroll taxes for the employers, the clients he was going to. So he would write, go in, fill in the forms. He would write out the checks to the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, assumedly, and would take care of it. As time was going on, what was happening was these clients start getting notices for non-payments. And of course, being the junior accountant and the one handling it, he was the one going in there, taking these notices and writing letters to the IRS, assumedly saying, oh no, it was paid and paid. Well, it took about a year or so, but sooner or later, everything catches up. What had happened was he had created a company in New Hampshire called International Resource Systems, IRS. And he was writing out the tax deposits to IRS and then depositing them into his own corporate account in New Hampshire. Probably got about $500,000 before he ended up getting tagged. Unfortunately, much of that was spent, and the net result was obviously whatever was not spent was taken back. He got into some hot water, of course, and the employer or their insurer was the one on the hook for that money. So the clients were made whole, and it was obviously not a very good thing. On top of that, now the accountant's reputation was damaged not due to their own direct fault, but indirectly by not having any kind of check and balance on that individual. For example, one thing that could have caught things faster would have been if somebody else was handling the notices. So by separating the duty of, being the one executing the transaction and the one reviewing those transactions, by having someone else look at those notices, it would have been caught much earlier. Just as a side note, if I'm not wrong, a financial institution like a bank, it's mandatory that you take your 2 weeks off consecutively, because usually in that time frame, any ongoings that you might be doing that are improper are going to take place, and you'll be caught and it'll be all found out. So thank you very much for that question. The next is from Isabella Rahman, and she asked, was there ever a period of time where you were worried about fraud, but after investigating, you were able to solve it? Yeah, I mean, there's been times where I've gone to clients and, I'm looking through their books and records, and I see a lot of withdrawals, cash withdrawals. And it starts bringing questions like, okay, a little bit here and there, it makes sense. But if there's not a backup for it, so obviously I bring that to the client's attention, and the client said, oh no, that was for, and in other words, they knew about it, and it was nothing to worry about. Some of it was money they took as a draw for themselves, which is nothing wrong with that, and some was for cash expenses that they were paying out. At that point, no one was harmed, so there was really no need to go any further. The next question is from Amaya Gomez. She asks, what strategies do you recommend for maintaining ethical decision-making and financial transparency when under pressure to meet certain expectations? Well, if you're an accountant in the tax world, you're constantly under constant pressure. You live in that world. There's every single month, no matter what the month in, there's always a deadline. And you got the pressure from the clients to get the returns done. In those situations, if it seems significant, especially if it seems like, obviously there's something wrong, you know what? The return can go late. No one's going to die. It's not like in my business, we're doing brain surgery. Yeah, there might be penalties and interest charged on the client, especially if they owe additional money. But sometimes you just got to stop and say, no, this just doesn't feel right. I need to iron this out. Don't have enough time. They may understand that, or especially if they're not the culprit, or they may try to keep pushing you that they want to get it done. And if you have to, you just walk away. And it's sometimes not easy to do, but better than getting caught up in something that you don't want to be caught up in. Then I have Monica Sizemore, and she asked, has there ever been a time where you detected fraud within a company, but management was uncooperative with their investigation? If so, how did I handle it? I've never had a time where the client was not cooperative. I mean, I have had instances where customers had problems and there was definite fraud. A couple that come to mind. One is I had a client in the lighting business, and they rented trucks with generators and the big lights for movie production, so they'd be out on the street and all that. And their bookkeeper was 100% handling everything. She was generating the checks. She was recording them in using what's called QuickBooks, which is a very popular tax accounting software. And she was mailing the payments out. And what ended up happening and how she got caught was there was 1 year where the employer said, hey, look, this year we're not going to be able to give out any Christmas bonuses. And so what happened was a little later on in the year, actually a little after that year was over, they needed to find canceled checks to prove payments that they made to a particular vendor. So they called in the foreman from the warehouse to also help dig through the hundreds and hundreds of checks to find the particular checks that they wanted to find, the copies, to make proof of payment. And in there, he found the check written out to the bookkeeper's name, and it said Christmas bonus. Well, he got pretty angry, and he went to the employer and said, hey, I thought you said you weren't giving out any bonuses. You gave Suzie Q, let's call her, a bonus. You didn't give anybody a bonus. Well, that queued them up, and then they started looking. And some of the other fun things that she was doing is, well, if you're in New York, you know of Con Edison, they're a utility company. So she'd write out checks to Con Edison, and the employer would see Con Edison. Okay, that's my electric bill. They sign it and send it out, except they happen to be her electric bills. Other things that she was doing was she was stacking the checks such that information wasn't seen. The client just was she always went to them at a busy point, sign, 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 sign. They really weren't paying attention. And one of the disadvantages of QuickBooks is you can go in after the fact and change information in QuickBooks. So the client was never actually looking at the canceled checks and and the bank statements. They were just looking at the ledger that was being printed. So if Suzie Q wrote out a check, I don't know, to whatever, to herself, to her credit card bill, they wouldn't know that, because inside QuickBooks, she would just change the name to something that was more common to them, let's say a supplier or something like that. Well, she ended up getting caught. And in her particular case, she was a single mother with a couple of kids, and they did a sting operation on her, the district attorney's office. They caught her. She got into trouble, but no jail time or anything like that. And she had to pay back money, but of course she didn't really have any. So they got very little of it back, and she ended up getting another job, and sure heck, she did it again at her new place. And this time she went to jail for a bit of time. Another question that comes from Isabella Tavares is, what type of support does your company provide for employees who become victims of scams at the workplace? Well, again, I've never had scams at the workplace. I mean, to my employees, I couldn't imagine. I don't even know how the heck that would happen in particular, because I'm a small firm. So, you know, I guess in a bigger firm, it could happen, if I'm reading the question right. So I really can't give a good answer to that one. Luckily, I can't, I should say.
Yeah. Well, I think that's coming from some of the readings that they did, which were about small businesses, you know, and the kind of emotional problem that you have if somebody gets scammed in the business and the business loses money. So that's not your issue in your business.
Yeah, no, hasn't been. Next is a question from Luke Nordstrom. In your experience working with family-owned or small businesses, how can owners rebuild trust and morale among employees after discovering internal theft or fraud? Well, looking at the clients that had experienced that, and actually I'll give you an example of the second one. The second one was a doctor's office, a orthopedic surgeon, and an employee of his was his bookkeeper, very trusted with him many, many years. And I think she must have had a life change that was to the negative. And so she decided that she would help herself. And she was in charge of everything: payroll, processing the payroll, writing out all checks, paying all invoices, signing the checks. I mean, can you get a better setup than that for a fraudster? And so she was giving herself raises and bonuses and paying herself large salaries, and the doctor was never paying attention. He just was going along with it, going along with it. And again, she got caught. And the problem is yes, it definitely sends a disruption. Oh, and then right behind that, it turned out that the person, if you remember in the beginning, I talked about separating duties a little bit. There was a person who was involved in receiving and authorizing products that were coming in. So the doctor's office would receive materials that they were purchasing. And what happened was this particular person that was in charge of receiving in supplies, the supplier, let's say it was 10 widgets. The supplier would actually deliver 7 widgets. He would, the purchase agent was marking off that 10 were received, and the vendor also, who working in cahoots with him, was giving him a spread of the extra money that he was getting paid. And then he had these 3 widgets, this vendor, to sell to someone else at a second time. So it obviously sent shockwaves through. And what happened was how that guy got caught was after the first person was caught, I said, we need to look at your internal controls. And obviously he had none, because the same people who were in charge of authorization were also the ones in charge of making payments and everything else. So that's a big negative. And how did he get the morale back? Well, he had to, I guess, first get everybody to understand what happened. Other employees got to see the ramifications of those people's fraud, the embarrassment they had. And what's also interesting is like he was under a quandary. Do I go after them criminally and all that? And he did not, because it just would have been in the courts, and he felt that it wasn't worth putting his name out there, maybe looking like a fool or whatever the case might be. Not sure what his reasoning was, but he did not do that. But he terminated the people, and he made sure everyone knew, and he created systems of control where now when, for example, when items are purchased, things are recorded by one person. They're then put in a storage room that's locked. Each time a person goes into there, there's an electronic key. It identifies who went in there. They have to log into the computer. What they took out goes through a scanning QR system, and so on and so on. So the systems have been built now to protect against that. He separated the duties. He actually looks at and signs all of the checks himself now, instead of giving that job off to someone else, which is actually a very important thing. I said he has just as much to blame for what happened to him as the people who did the theft. Actually, just as a quick side note, because someone had a question about how did the military help me from this, my identifying things in this or in business. And one of them is that it was drummed into you early on is you had your foot locker and or your whatever it might be, and you had to have a padlock on it. And if you didn't lock it and something was stolen, the thief was in trouble, and so were you for not securing it better. So the person who executed the fraud and sometimes the person who had the fraud put against them are both at fault for some level or another. And obviously the fraudster is the bad guy. But, if you put yourself in a position where you're letting yourself be able to be defrauded, well, you have to look in the mirror and say, oh, I did that. Next is a question from Crystal Ann DiBiento. Given your experience as both a CPA and a veteran, how have the skills and discipline you developed in the military influenced the way you approach financial planning and client management at my business? Well, I just gave you a little bit of an example. Well, some of the things I learned was, if you're on time, you're late, meaning you got to be early. Hurry up and wait. It's better to get there on time and not be needed than be needed and not there at all. And so I guess, and then also a sense of duty to, you take on a client, you're taking on the responsibility of meeting what that client wants. Obviously, you negotiate your terms that you're going to get paid, but, as long as they're doing their job, which is paying their bill, then you need to fulfill your job and meet your promises. The other thing I could say that it's helped me with is to staying focused on a task at hand. Everyone thinks that they're multitaskers. There's absolutely no such thing as a multitasker. That is impossible for human beings. You can only focus on one thing at a time. And if you allow those distractions to come in around you, and they're going to happen, and sometimes there's no choice. The building's on fire. Okay, that's a good distraction that you need to handle right away. But for the most part, you don't need the got a minutes. You don't need and I know that this might be a hard one for you guys. You don't need the cell phone notifications hitting you every 32 seconds. You need to focus on the one task and the one task that you have at hand. Next question is from Julia Giamento. What advice would you give future managers for balancing ethical decision-making with performance pressure and shareholder expectations? Well, again, that goes, I think I kind of addressed that a little bit. You need to feel comfortable with the work product that you're producing. And if you don't listen to those spidey senses that we all have, and it doesn't mean that it's a no-go, but that just means pay a little more attention, it's telling you. And I've had situations where, like, well, it's not really a fraud thing, but like where a client says, oh, this is what you should do. This is what, I looked into it. This is how you can handle this particular tax issue. And I'm like, it don't feel right. It doesn't sound right. Never say no. Open up the book and take a look. And, if you find that, it's totally out, if it's not even a gray area, but it's like outside the realm, you're better off not doing it. And I've had situations where, I had prepared income tax returns for clients in New York City for rental properties. And in New York, they require real property income and expense reports to be given to them so they can decide how much real estate taxes that they're going to defraud from us. And in this particular client's case, he wanted me to change the numbers. I said, I can't change the numbers. It's not, I got you. First off, you got a tax return that says one thing. If you do a financial statement, it says something else. That's a major problem. They have to match. And he wanted the numbers to be less because he wanted to pay less in taxes. And it was a big client. And actually, it was early on in my career. And I said, no. And he must have went around to other accountants to see if he could go elsewhere, because I saw checks getting cut to other accountants. That's one advantage of being in the tax preparer. You get to see what's really happening. And he didn't change because he couldn't get anybody else to do it. I don't know what the reasoning was. He didn't change. But I says, I'm not gonna risk my license and the rest of my livelihood for you to save a couple of bucks. Whatever the numbers are, the numbers are. Collect less rent. So yeah, but it does happen where you're sometimes put in a difficult situation. Next is from Giovanni Caprielli. How have you witnessed employee theft impact smaller family-run businesses, and what steps should be taken to prevent it? Well, I talked already about a couple of situations in these small businesses where the doctor and the lighting company were defrauded by their bookkeeper. And again, just as much as the person committing the fraud, the owner who put them in that position, who failed to, quote, lock that foot locker, is just as much at fault. He failed to have proper checks and balances. So you want to have separation of duties. So, for example, you don't want the person who's sending out the invoices, receiving the mail, and then making the deposits. How do you gain control of that? Well, you'd have to, so person A prepares and sends the invoices. Person B is the one who opens the mail and makes the deposits. And then person C is the one who verifies deposits and records them against the accounts receivable. And that's an area where people get defrauded from, which I've not seen yet myself individually, because it's called lapping. And what the person does to commit the fraud is if they have control of the whole receivable system, meaning the issuing the invoices, the receipt of the mail, and the recording, the making of the deposits. What happens there is the person sends out the invoices, and then they take some of those checks to be deposited, steal those checks, and believe it or not, banks will take checks made out to, it's a lot harder now, but a check could be written out to Mr. X and you could deposit it in Mr. B's account, and the bank most of the time don't even look. And what happens is now the person records that as being received. So the client is not getting the notice that they owe money, and then they just keep repeating that cycle using the newer money to fill in the older money. Then what happens is usually the bookkeeper gets greedy and it gets overwhelming and they can't make it, and they can't lap the income over, or they go on a 2-week vacation and they get caught. Another question is from Thurman Collins. How do you balance modern technology and automation in accounting and maintaining the personal relationship and trust that you have defined founding in my business? Well, technology is here, it's with us, and you can use technology. I gave a little example of creating an inventory system with QR codes and scanning of systems and doors with documentation of who's entering and exiting, and everybody knows technology is all around us. But we're still human beings, and without human contact, well, what the heck's the whole point of this whole journey that we're on here. So, you know, it's a matter of really maintaining contact. And it's interesting. It just came to my mind is it's something I read. Actually, I watched on YouTube. Shouldn't watch too much YouTube, but something I watched on YouTube, and it was about and it was a law firm, and they're talking about what doctors who committed malpractice, and how whether the person decided to sue or not sue, and one of the defining factors in doctors being sued or not sued was if that doctor was liked and had a good relationship with the patient. So if the patients had good feelings about the doctor and they felt he was a good person and he meant okay, they're much less likely to sue him. If they had a negative relationship with the doctor, even if they didn't have that much of a claim, they would be more aggressive at going after the person. So if people like you, it's just the way it is. We're humans. Human nature is you're going to suffer less consequences, and also you'll maintain better business connections. It also, makes it difficult for people to get mad at you when maybe you're a little late with preparing their stuff. Next is a question from Dulce Ramos. As your family-owned company has been around for many years, decades, yeah, you ain't kidding. Curious to know the many variations of fraud your family has encountered over the years. Well, luckily, we haven't really seen any. Actually, that's not true. I had an experience of a fraud on me, and it was from a client. And the ones that get you the most are the ones where you have a good relationship, or you thought you did, and the person does something wrong. So I had a client that said, "Hey, Dave, I need help. And I know when they do and they don't because I see their numbers. Can I borrow money? Yes, I lent them money. Then I lent them more money. And then he was paying me some and then needed more and so on. And it built up to quite a bit. And he says, when I sell my house, I'm going to pay you the balance. Don't worry. And I saw his house was on the market, and I knew he didn't have a very big mortgage and a lot of money was going to be coming out. Well, the house got sold. So he came in and says, "Oh, good. Now you can pay me in full." He goes, "No, I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" "Well, the house was only in my wife's name and she won't give me any of the money." So as I was sitting there, it was going through my head, and I went, "Wait a minute. You knew all along." He goes, "Just did what I had to do." Now, of course, being a male and having a Green Beret military background, violence came into my head, but I didn't do it. And what was interesting was, now we made a payment plan, and I got paid over time with interest, which is not how I wanted it to go. And his checks would bounce and I'd have to call him and so on and so on. And then one day I call him up, said, "Your check bounced again." And whatever I was saying, he goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. You say lots of things and do nothing." And this also goes to answer another question someone had, I believe. And that morning I happened to be driving to work and was listening to the radio, and they were talking about how when something happens to you from someone else, look at your own participation in that and accept responsibility and let it go. Forgive them and forgive yourself. So when the guy said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," I was ready to go and say something, and I went, "You're right. You are right. I'm very sorry. I should have known better. In fact, as it was going along, I did feel it and knew better. I shouldn't have done it. So I forgive you for doing that to me, and I forgive I forgive myself. However, from now on, if you fall behind, no problem. I'm not going to be mad. I'm going to hand it to my attorney. And if I get a nickel, that's good. If I don't get a nickel, that's fine too. I'll take the tax deduction for it." And you let it go. By holding it in, you're eating yourself up. It's just not worth it. Next, Daniel Augusto said, "What strategies help you attract and keep clients when you first started your firm?" Well, what I learned to build clients is you don't sell. You sell yourself. You don't sell your product, number one. And what I would do is I'd walk around the area where my office was, and I'd go into different stores and I'd buy things and I'd talk to them and I'd give them advice, not saying who or what I am or anything like that. And then eventually I'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm an accountant. I'm down the road. If you ever have a problem or question, I'm sure you have somebody already But sometimes you might want a second opinion about something, or, people die, people move, whatever the case might be. And, you're welcome to give me a shot. And sometimes weeks, months, even years later, some of those little contacts I threw out there start coming in. So by not being pressuring somebody, because that's not going to work, or if it does, it's short term. By not trying to, sell your product, whatever that might be, sell yourself. Show that you're somebody that cares about people and do care about people, because that's really how sales are made. If you want to be a salesman, that's how you build business, and you get referrals. Next question is from Kaylin DeJoy, and it says, with 40 years of experience leading a firm, what provisions do you have in place in order to decrease the risk of fraud? What positions in your firm tend to have the highest risk of fraud, and how do you go about hiring those positions? The higher up the food chain in any business, the more potential that someone can commit a fraud, because you're giving more freedom, more trust, and more access. So the more access you have, the more likely something's going to happen. Whenever I've looked at other businesses, the people at the top, the ones in control of it all, well, they're the ones that don't follow their own systems. I mean, here's a minor thing, even in my own business, myself, like everyone has to get their timesheets in. How are we going to bill clients if we don't put our time in? And I'm the worst one at putting in my timesheets. Who's going to yell at me? Now I should yell at myself because I'm not getting paid for the work that I'm doing all the time. But I allow, my staff actually yells at me for doing that, but I let them. But really, I found that, and I recommend this to all my clients. I mean, if they're big, that's different, but for the most part, companies with 20, 30, up to 50 or so people, maybe that's a little high, but 50, they should be doing their own bank reconciliations. Why? I get the bank statement, I see the bank statement, I see the disbursements going out. So I'm looking at it. Same thing with the credit card. I get the credit, someone enters all the information. I get the credit card statement. I go through it and do the reconciliation. If I see something like, what's that? I start asking, and I'll, where's the receipt for that? So by staying hands-on, you also get a gut feeling for your own numbers, and you'll go, something don't look right, something don't feel right. You keep track of your information, obviously, in some kind of a software to make life easier. And then whenever there's like large variation changes that bring your attention. So let's say every year auto expenses are $1,000, and then next year's 900, no big deal. Next year's 1,200, no big deal. Next year's 20,000. Whoa, what's that? Okay, oh, somebody may have misclassified something, no big deal. Somebody bought themselves a car. Well, that's a big deal. So, by being hands-on, you'll do much better.
Hey, David,
Yeah.
can I ask a follow-up question on that one? How much time do you think that you spend on doing that work, the reconciliation and overseeing, as opposed to, your business?
I have a lot of bank accounts because I have several segmented businesses. So, I mean, first, the bank reconciliations are once a month.
Mhm.
And I don't know, if I spend 3 hours a month doing it, that's pretty much it. I also handle my own payroll, and I do my own payroll processing. I will probably hand out some of that, but I'll have control on updating people's wages and bonuses.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to be like that doctor who person just kept giving himself more money. Joseph Thorne asked, with the record of success for over 40 years, what did the firm do to minimize risk and ensure long-term success? Being good at tracking the workflow that's going in and going out. What you want to be careful of, and it happens still, no matter how good you get, it's going to happen. A client gives you a job, especially if it's like not a routine job, like in my firm, that would be preparing a tax return, where it's super controlled, but if something comes in, an audit, someone's being audited, are you making sure you maintain proper control over that? So having good systems of control in place to where you're going to put deadlines. With the use of a computer, you could put like little, notifications out there, like, hey, I promised Mr. Smith this would be done by December 10th, and it's now up, 3 weeks out, bing, and pay attention, and then you put your milestones in there. So just keeping good track of the workflow. Having partnered with small business owners for many years, how do you assist your clients to restore trust and confidence after they've experienced fraud or theft? What has been your experience as you observed various approaches that improve trust, camaraderie, emotional safety? I talked about some of the problems that had happened at a few clients. Sometimes the owners become, very angry. That one doctor client, I think he's gone overboard and how I don't think does things nice for the employees. I think he's forgotten that people are what make the business. But setting up good internal controls, let the people know. Even if when I go back in time, like a minor thing, this one just came to my mind now. Like there was a deli owner, and there's a lot of everyone eats. People have friends, so a little friend comes in, the girl behind the counter or the guy behind the counter, he rings up, $1.50. Meanwhile, there's $25 worth of stuff, things like that. So the client didn't really have the money to buy a whole camera system. So I says, well, buy a camera that has, that's not even a camera, that has a red light on it and point it at the cash register. And just by doing that, his income went up. Stuff was going on. Also, what I do in my office is I kind of like create a camaraderie here. How 12 o'clock, 12:30, whatever time they want, everyone stops, gets away from the desk. I have a kitchen area. Everyone eats lunch together. So now what's going to happen, like everyone knows, as you're eating, people talk. So now they're gaining a connection with each other. Periodically, I'll have events. Like one year, I took everyone to Pennsylvania and we went to a shooting range. Another year, we went to Manhattan, and these places where they pre-draw on it, like an image, and then they teach you how to paint, and everyone paints the paintings, So, you do things that create connection, and hopefully everyone joins in. And I've had situations where there was one guy who just never wanted to join in. And then he always complained that he felt like an outcast. And I said, you're making yourself an outcast. You don't sit and lunch with everybody. You don't go on any of our trips. You're doing it to yourself.
Yep.
He eventually,
Also, you often have a dog in the
yeah,
office.
I do. I have a German Shepherd dog, and it's good for the people too, because you get stressed out, and the dog comes up and forces you to play a little bit and pet them. And also gives the people an excuse to get away and up from their desk, because I'm gonna go walk the dog for you. Okay, yeah, you're making phone calls, but that's okay. The dog's getting some exercise, and it's good to get up and clear your head. I have no problem with that. And when people chit chat, and it doesn't matter to me. But if it starts getting a little long in the tooth, and I walk by and I'm catching that, so I don't get mad, I don't yell, I go, oh, great, I see you're not busy, I have this task I need for you to get done. So unless the person wants to get a little extra work, they stop their chatting. Hopefully I can get through a few more of these, because they're all good questions. Leah Alston asked, how would you assist a small business in restoring trust and ensuring that fraud doesn't occur again if you learned that one of your employees had committed fraud? Well, obviously, if one of my people committed a fraud on a client, I'd make it whole. And if it was beyond my scope, well, I have an E&O insurance, errors and omission insurance, which covers things like that too, employee theft. But that doesn't restore the confidence from the client. And then again, that also goes back to that statement I made about having a good connection, where I talked about the doctors being more or less likely to be sued. If your clients like you and they've built up a long-term relationship with you, they're much less likely to go after you also and sue you, versus if you're not liked by your clients. So it's always good to be liked by your clients for other reasons than, well, just being liked. internally, if someone's, you could say if this particular client is nervous, say, well, I'm going to only do the work on it if it's that level of a client. If it's not, then you say, okay, and I'll give it to this particular person, and you put passwords on all of their internal data so that either myself or just that one person who's assigned to them would be able to access their information. And we do get a lot of information as accountants, obviously, and then remove the offender. Yes, if they did something wrong, you got to get rid of them. Van Johnson asked, which skills should young accountants prioritize as tech advances in the field, and what new fraud risks do you see emerging with new tech? What comes to my mind there is, I don't know if you ever heard of the acronym GIGO, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And a lot of people think just because it's coming from a computer, it's good. Well, I'm sure some of you or all of you have seen the AI generated YouTube videos or shorts, and you go, wow, that just looks just like whoever. And look what they're saying. And meanwhile, it's an AI generated image. So, garbage in, garbage out. I started doing accounting and tax work myself directly in 1984, a million years ago. And I remember computers were just getting into the small business world. And, clients get audits. And I've had a client who's getting audited by the IRS, and there was a private mortgage, whatever it was that they had. So he had, since it was a private mortgage, there was no 1099s or anything like that coming from a bank. So I went onto the computer and I created a amortization schedule. And it so happened to exactly tie into the numbers that needed to be tied into. So I handed it to the IRS agent. Well, it's a computer printout. It's good. So, be careful what you're looking at. Just because it's coming out of a computer doesn't mean it's going to be correct. This year, actually, and I guess it's not skilled enough, the AI, I had a client who questioned his individual tax return, and who actually, he's an accountant, but he doesn't do tax work. And he gave it to me, and he works for a large accounting firm. And his tax return, no joke, was 500 pages, just under 500 pages long. A lot of action. And he didn't agree with me. He says, these can't be right, what I owe. And he said he fed it into AI, all, scanned it in. I guess he's got the high-speed AI at this big accounting firm. And it came back saying all these errors. I says, well, okay, let's start with the first one. It says, I failed to show your $30,000 estimated payment. Well, here it is. It says this. Well, here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Just because it's coming out of a computer doesn't mean it's going to be accurate. So I don't know if that exactly answered the question, but yeah, just because it's coming out of a computer, remember GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. We got Saul Singh. My question would be, how would you deal with fraud when it is in front of you, and what actions will you take?
Actually, can I add to that one?
Yeah.
So a lot of the students are going to be managers and hopefully executives at some point, but there might not be in finance, and they're not going to be the bookkeeper or the CFO or something like that. If they're in a company and they're not in one of those positions, how would they suspect that there was fraud? Or could they?
Well, I mean, it would depend altogether on what their particular position was.
Yeah.
Let's say they were managing a warehouse. I don't know. So you've got products coming in, products going out. If you were a warehouse manager, you would be the one responsible to make sure things would be being done accurately. So you would individually want to make sure the duties were segregated, that the person receiving, has the checklist, that they actually look in the boxes to make sure that those items are in there. Make sure that the QR codes that are on there are actually matching what they should be. And that when they get put into a bin, depending on the type of warehouse you have, the bin has particular products to go to particular places and so on. So if something's out of skew there, like, hey, 10 boxes per my list, 10 boxes of, I don't know, tiddlywinks came in, but there's no tiddlywinks on the tiddlywink shelf. So really, I guess it's more kind of individual. Yeah, so I guess there's potential for anything. Obviously, if all you're doing is sweeping the floor, which I hopefully with the college degree, not just sweeping the floor, unless it's for a lot of money. There's you at some point you're going to move up to a management position, and as a manager, you're going to have to look at your particular field, and a lot of times one of the thefts is employee time. So it's going against the employer. One of my clients has an auto repair shop and multiple ones, and people were coming in late, signing in that they were in on time. Okay, then he went to the punch cards, and then what would happen was the guy showing up late gives a call. Hey, Mike, can you do me a favor? Punch me in. I'm right down the road. Okay, so now what he finally has is you got to walk in, put your hand on a scanner, and it scans your hand, and it records exactly when you came in, when you went to lunch, when you got back from lunch. So employee theft of time is there, and so as a manager of a department, whatever it may be, you'd be the one responsible to make sure that the people were accurately reporting in and out. I know that there's a lot of at-home workers nowadays, and what companies do is they keep track of, like, keyboard movement, hey, that keyboard's been still for quite a long time. What's going on? Is there anything happening there? Yeah, so that's pretty much that. We got a question from Najar Diaz. In your decades of experience advising small businesses, how have you seen owners successfully recover and rebuild employee trust? It's kind of a question we already answered already a little bit. You get what I do is whenever I'm creating systems of any sort, control the client flow, whatever it might be, is I get the staff, we have a staff meeting, and I say, what should we do? So I let them design their own things to track themselves. So if there's a problem with it, go, hey, well, you guys designed it together. And obviously I've got the final yay or nay, but get your staff involved in creating the structures that they're going to be following. That's a way to get people involved, and it also gets them to understand that you want them to be part of the process. They're not outside the process, just cogs. They're actually in my business. Some businesses like have the standard diagram. Got the president, CEO, then you've got manager A's, and you got manager B's, and so on and so on. I operate more like I don't know what the heck it's called. I forgot. Like the diagrams where you got the circles that interlocked, and I tell people nobody's more important than anybody, whether you're the receptionist or the accountant manager. If somebody screws up, we're all screwed. If the front desk does the wrong job, we're all got a problem. If the manager does the wrong job, we're all got a problem. So we got to work together. So you let people understand that they have responsibilities and that they're responsible for everybody else in the business, that they affect not just themselves, but everyone around them. Christopher Brand said, what are the best 3 things you can do in company operations and policies to prevent fraud? Well, good internal accounting controls, periodic and random reviews, and as much as you can, do your own numbers. A lot of times as they get bigger, they they go, I'm losing track of things. Well, do it yourself. Not every task, but get in there, do your own bank reconciliations, look at your financial statements, watch where things are going. I have a Patrice St. Fleur. Given my decades of experiences working with businesses, how have you seen fraud, especially internal fraud, impact emotional well-being of business owners and and so on? Okay. Yeah, I have actually. The one I actually think I gave an example of myself where a client defrauded me, making statements. I guess I could have protected myself better by going, can I see a deed to that property and see if your name's on that thing? Whatever. But I didn't. And really, what can you do about the emotional side of it? If there's nothing you can do about it, don't let it eat you up. Just let it go and understand that, chalk that up to, I call them educational expenses. Your college degree costs I don't know, St. John's there, a couple $100,000 to get through. That's an expense. Okay. You lose money because somebody defrauded you. Well, it's an educational expense. Hopefully it's one that you can work yourself past, and you have to work yourself past. It's not a matter of if you can, you will, it's just recognize your own fault in it, because maybe you participated in it. Like my sister who gave out her name and her social security number on the phone to somebody saying something, now she's got to bear the consequences of now having her name and her social security number and her date of birth out there given to some guy on a random phone call. And it happens a lot of times to people, unfortunately. So yeah, let it go. Let and don't harbor it in yourself, because it's only going to mess you up. A question from Aldo Torres. In a family-owned business, ties with relatives can sometimes lead to fraud or unprofessional business practices. What governance steps do you recommend taking to avoid the fraud? Actually, I kind of talked about one that happened in my family. My brother, who had the computer business with the cousin of ours, who was selling under his own name and buying under my brother's name and also getting paid at the same time. So checks and balances. Some of the reasons people do this is they feel entitled. Well, I should, and they keep raising themselves. So, well, I should, whatever that I should be. My brother's just as much to blame for that happening as my cousin was. Okay. Well, maybe the cousin's a little more to blame, but my brother's to blame too, because had he had proper controls in place in the first place, the cousin might not have taken that shot. Had you not, it's like kind of like when the police do entrapment, and they leave a purse opened up with cash sticking out of it. Okay, come on. You're both at fault, if in most of the case, many of the cases. Gabrielle Fretis, what's the most important lesson you learned about managing people over the years? Treat people the way you want to be treated, unless you're a masochist. And remember that, if somebody's having a tough time, that, we're all on our own little journeys, and, we don't know what they're going through. So, be a little forgiving of somebody if they act a little curt or discourteous. Also, don't accept, if somebody's constantly treating you badly, don't accept it. If you're feeling bad about it, walk away. You're not a slave. Leave, go to somewhere else. Some people are like, oh, I'm going to fight, I'm going to yell, I'm going to create. You know what? Sometimes be like water, flow, and you're going to do much better in life.
So is there any question that we didn't ask you that you think that we should have?
Well, first off, I hope I didn't teach people how to commit fraud.
No, I don't think so.
Actually, with this, just a side note that pops up, because at one time I had, and I still do, I have an insurance license, and I used to have, and I gave it up, my Series 7 broker's license. And part of that is the know your customer thing, and detecting potential, frauds. And they said the two occupations to be most conscious of potentially, doing something, were lawyers and accountants. Because we know the systems. So if you really want to learn a system, become a lawyer or an accountant. And if you're in school for whatever particular, you know, business acumen that you want to go into, take accounting classes. They may be boring, but you know what? Everything comes to numbers. Life comes to numbers. Households come to numbers. So just be part of it, and get a good understanding, and don't take life too seriously, because it's all just a journey anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, David. This was really useful. And I'm going to ask the students to write a response, 3 things that they learned, and I'll send you the results.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You can see.
And I was happy to help out. It's always nice to give back a little bit here and there when you can. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching today's podcast. Like and subscribe, and in the comments, I would love for you to ask questions. We do our best to get back to answering your questions and hope to give you more information about crazy topics in the world today.